Jim and Terry Show. Once again, the Hobbit Hole studio is a little empty these days, the seat being unoccupied. Jim, we wish you well. Today, we're talking about Justin Trudeau and the polarizing effect that Poilievre's propaganda campaign of attacks and personal nitty-gritty grinding of Trudeau over the past 2 years, ever since he was chosen? I'm not sure chosen is the word. I use the word manipulated into the leadership, with some dirty politics being suspected but not found yet. I'm going to start with this analogy. While I was an employee of the Toronto Board of Education, it was, the usual thing was that we would get curriculum initiatives and research from California. Why California? Because they were very progressive in educational areas. And so curriculum developed and tested in the United States, in California specifically, would find its way up into our teaching conferences and PD days for development of teachers and educators in the Toronto Board. Usually a lag of about 10 years, time enough for what seemed to be the latest, greatest methodology and cutting-edge research, evidence-based research comes out, and we accept it and embrace it in Toronto, only to find out that California has moved on after trying to implement the very research that they developed and moved on. Meanwhile, we're left holding the implementation reins in Toronto. And I wondered about that, and it's always stuck with me. And I can't remember the curriculum initiatives. I can remember that observation in a PD session where that stuck in my mind. And all these years later, I'm going to use that as a launching point. What came out of California, progressive, liberal, democratic California, came to be an analogy for politics. What's tried and tested and failed in the United States is embraced in Canada with a lag time of about, give or take, 10 years. So what am I looking at? Well, I looked at a YouTube feed that happened to come up, and it was a program called The Line. Who's the guy? Matt Gurney and Jen Gerson, I think. Gerson. It didn't take me long to understand the bias. It doesn't mean I'm not going to read them or listen to them. But one thing that led me to another, there's a conference going on in Edmonton, apparently, and this was a plug for that conference, so I watched a bit of their show. Didn't take long to realize by language, just language, then tone, the giveaways that this was, a right side, hardline conservative position that they were taking. Then I did some digging. Of course, Matt Gurney worked or is a journalist. That doesn't give you any credentials necessarily, but he was writing for the National Post, which is a national newspaper, albeit conservative, and albeit the headlines show a conservative bent and interpretation of things regarding politics in Canada. So a little more digging, and I came up with this article that he had published on The Line. I think Matt Gurney is the founder and owner, CEO of this thing called theline.ca, I think. Anyway, it's both a website and a podcast, and Matt Gurney had this one to say in March of 2024. Matt Gurney, title, What I Got Wrong About Poilievre. I thought he'd steer the party into oblivion, but he's on course to win the biggest majority in my living memory. All right, that's laying down the gauntlet. That's throwing down the gloves. That's really stirring it up. So what was he talking about in the article? He was talking about Poilievre steering the party to the hardline far right, and that would cost him popularity. In fact, the opposite seems to be true. Polling numbers suggest a greater than 20-point spread at this point. I'm not one to take polls into consideration. They are just snapshots of a moment, and those moments can swing with revelations, with scandals, with some revelation of something, whether it's finally proven that Polyev got his leadership because of Chinese interference. Now, that takes me into a sidebar note, so I'll go over to the side and explore this one just for a bit. When we talk about Trudeau, the column The Line with Matt Gurney suggests, quote, Trudeau's an asshole, and more people are convinced that he is. All right, then there's fighting words too. So when you, in your writing, use a descriptor like asshole, really? Okay. You better have some evidence. Well, of course, they would point to SNC-Lavalin. They would point to the WE scandal. I'm not sure to what extent these are scandals. They are certainly bad looks. They are fundraising faux pas. They are government money being awarded to what might be called partisan endeavors. And then we've got the whole payroll debacle, firms that were given awards for government contracts who lately, I can't even remember the name of this, but software engineers who are sitting in a basement somewhere, two of them making millions, plural, millions with government contracts. So I need to explore more of that, but that's not where I'm going. I want to go to a moment that defined for me, and I will probably vote Liberal. And the only other choice would be Jagmeet Singh and do a protest vote to the NDP. Not that I'm enthralled with Jagmeet Singh, but I am enthralled at the idea of CASA, that agreement, which is we will support you as long as we are working together for policies that advance the cause of most Canadians. And I use that word, most Canadians. Unlike Polyev, who says that he is working class pedigree and supports the common Canadian. What is the common Canadian? Well, if you want to find it, it's going to be in unions. The common Canadian is the GM worker, the Ford worker, the auto industry, oh my gosh, back in the 60s, we used to have some very strong Canadian auto worker union leadership. And I know my good friend Jim, you're rolling your eyes as you listen to this because you are an anti-unionist and I am an ardent supporter. And I'm looking at union support to say you're either for the common man or you're not. Polyev is not. Canadian unions are coming out rank and file against Polyev. That to me is a big indicator. If you cannot get support of unions, you're not supporting the common Canadian, if there is such a pedigree. So I'm wondering about that. But get back to the China story. I got off topic a bit. One moment that will be indelibly etched in my mind was the stare down. Trudeau is tall. In politics, that carries something. Trudeau uses that in one particular event in 2022 that to me defined and will carry the legacy moment of Trudeau for me. And that's the stare down with Xi Jinping. I think it was at a G20. And the issue was right on the tails of the release of the two Michaels, held without cause by China, because we in Canada followed our agreement with the United States to hold the daughter of the CEO of Huawei accountable for whatever the case was. I've lost some of the details in my memory. Haven't followed it as closely. And yet I do know that it's about China being offended that minuscule Canada would detain. Well, of course we had these agreements with the United States that if they want us to detain somebody at an airport, we will. And that's part of our agreement with the United States. Well, we did. And it cost the two Michaels years of their life. And there was some threat that they would probably not make it out of China. China does this, grabs foreign workers without cause, just like Russia, detains them, in some cases like Navalny. They die while in custody. No explanations given, body handed over. And that was the fear for the two Michaels. At the end of that thing, two jets passed each other, both across the Pacific at the same time. One sending the Huawei CEO's daughter back to China, Beijing, I think, and the other one with the two Michaels coming back to Vancouver. It was an end of a sordid saga, and why people continue to do business in countries that are rogue. Is it for $1? Really? Is the price of your life worth the trade that you're trying to get from a rogue country? And by rogue, it's not just the big players. It's not just Russia and China. There are other countries who are also authoritarian, dictatorial, who will snatch anybody at any time using their secret police. Yeah, you're vulnerable when you trade in these countries. And there are a list of countries that Canada has prepared where you are at risk if you try to do business there. Well, China and the stare down. The most important thing to me was Trudeau using his height advantage to stare down Xi Jinping. And to me, that was a moment almost like Vimy Ridge, where Canada stood up to a bully. And I would say that we were victorious in that stare down. If you look in the National Post, you look on conservative media, you will say, Trudeau humbled by Xi Jinping, Trudeau scolded by Xi Jinping. You will find headlines like that. And yet to me, that stare down represented standing up to a bully. And that to me is the defining moment and the legacy moment, and the photograph, if there's one that would encapsulate what I think Trudeau has brought since 2015 and since the election, is that stare down with that power. The other moment, if I had to point to one, would be Trudeau managing the G7. Russia had just been kicked out. It was the G7. And it was because of that Trump got his feathers ruffled, and the economic advisor said, there's a special place in hell for Trudeau. Well, if you're a conservative, you look on these things as defining moments where Canada was kowtowed, bullied, intimidated. And yet I would say Trudeau shone in those moments, carving out Canadian identity where there's little wiggle room, using the Gordie Howe elbows to get Canada a better position in the international world. Trudeau, asshole? I'm not sure. Maybe if you're in the far right. But for the rest of us ma and pa types, he represents what we value, standing up to the bully. Jim and Terry Show, signing off.